Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning. This is our open office hours with the BJA State Policy Advisors. This is an opportunity for you guys to ask all of the questions you have been wanting to ask of your state policy advisors that we haven't gotten to either through email or by phone. John, I'll turn it over to you if you want to do some brief introductions and we'll get started.
Sure. Well, thanks for showing up. This is really an opportunity for you all to ask the state policy advisors questions you have about your grant administration, about your budget, about potential grant adjustment modifications you might have. It's not limited to state policy advisor questions. If you have other questions that pertain to BJA or CNA, we'll try to answer them here. If we don't answer them here, we'll certainly follow up and get answers to you. I appreciate probably 35 people who are not presenting or so being on the call. So I hope that you do ask questions in the chat and we'll moderate those. I will start out with a few things that I wanted to cover. I alluded to, and then Dr. Craig Uchida alluded to, the Small Rural and Tribal Micro Grant Program. So some of you, particularly if you're a small rural or tribal agency, might be curious about that. In 2020, we took $10 million of our roughly $22 million budget appropriation and decided to stand up a micro grant program. And this is essentially a streamlined grant application program for smaller agencies, generally 50 or fewer sworn, some rural agencies that fit that 50 or under, and a few if they're in a rural county that are larger than that, and then all tribal agencies. And the rationale for that was that those smaller agencies are not often as grant savvy and experienced as larger agencies, and they're not as competitive. We developed a streamlined application process that was administered by Craig Uchida and his team at Justice and Security Strategies. They've been a longtime partner with CNA on providing technical assistance for the BWC PIP, the program that you all applied for and received awards. It's kind of a moot point for you now since you have your awards this year, but it is something you might want to alert your neighbors and colleagues to. We expect to be recompeting that in a solicitation that will be announced through BJA, but it's run by Justice and Security Strategies on behalf of BJA. And I will post the link to the Small Rural and Tribal Agency program as soon as I'm done with these comments. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. I don't see any questions that have come in, so I'll kind of move on to my next topic. I think some of you are aware of the array of grants that the Bureau of Justice Assistance provides, as well as some other of our OJP partner components, the Office of Violent Crime, the Office of Victims of Crime. I think I always get that screwed up. It's the Office of Victims of Crime, OVC, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the National Institute of Justice, and I'm leaving one out there, but they're all under the OJP umbrella. I'll post the general OJP grant opportunities link, the BJA grant opportunities link, and also the COPS office. The COPS office is not under the OJP umbrella, but we work closely with them. They're a separate office, and they're well known for their hiring grants, but they do run other programs for community policing and for drug intervention and control, at least the last time I looked. So, and then all of these grant opportunities, as well as grant opportunities across the federal government, can be found on grants.gov. So you can do a keyword search and it'll show you grants under DOJ, Office of Justice Programs, the COPS Office grants. There may be some DHS grants that apply to you, Department of Homeland Security or Department of State grants, even some HHS, Health and Human Services, that apply to law enforcement agencies or cities that are working on housing issues in concert with law enforcement. So there's a lot of federal resources out there, and I'll post those shortly. But I do encourage you, if you have any questions, any challenges you're having with managing your grant that Gerardo or Tomorrow can help you with. Flora, unfortunately, is not feeling well today, so she's not going to be on the call. any of your grant-related questions, please post them.
One of the questions that we do have in the chat is similar to one we got yesterday that I'd like to ask again that popped up here about an agency having a site visit. So my agency has an upcoming BJA site visit. We're all set on the financial and administrative parts, but would like to know what might be required from a technical standpoint. So what would be required on the technical side during the BJA site visit?
Usually, before the meeting is held, we send a letter out with 30 days in advance with detailed information that we require from the grantee. As soon as you get the letter, you have 30 days to get that information to us. And then the information is financial, administrative, and programmatic information.
I just need clarity on the question. When they say a technical standpoint, do they mean technology-wise? What will be?
I don't think so. I think it just means like what would they need to provide beyond just if there's anything else beyond the financial or administrative records or documentation. Is there anything else they would need to provide as it relates to, you know, I think they mean body-worn cameras. They need to see the camera, talking to officers, those type of things.
We will do a spot check for any major equipment purchases. So we do things like go over property records. Sometimes, like I said, we would want to do a visual. So if they have an upcoming site visit, I'm assuming that they're one of my grantees because I think I'm the only one that's going out on site next week. Yeah, that's what they should expect. We'll go over all of the documentation that was presented, that was listed in the letter. OJP has a very comprehensive and thorough checklist. Basically, it's a three-pronged review. We look at the grants programmatically, administratively, and financially. So it's going to be a lot of examination of documentation, discussion programmatically. We'll look at their performance measures and how, you know, the method that they use to collect the performance data that they're reporting to us. We'll look at a lot of their source documentation. We'll look at their accounting system records, financial system statements, and things like that.
Thank you. Another question we have, can you tell us what the Small Rural and Tribal Micro Grant Program is and how we can learn more about it?
I said a little bit of that in my introduction, but it's essentially a program that we devised in 2020 and competed in 2021, where we took about $10 million of our appropriations of $22 million for that year and designed a streamlined application process specifically targeted to smaller agencies, 50 or fewer sworn, any tribal agency, and rural agencies, which are mostly 50 or fewer sworn. There's a handful of rural counties that may have more than 50 sworn sheriff's deputies or police officers, and they were eligible to apply for that. Unlike the applications that I think pretty much everybody attending this session filled out, they're not as narrative driven. So they're more streamlined and really tailored to those agencies that don't have the capacity or experience historically to apply for grants. It's a competitive program and the stipulations are fairly similar. It requires a 50% match. So on the front end, it's more streamlined, a little less onerous, and also on the back end, small rural or tribal grantee. And I think we've awarded about 400 to date, and we'll be opening up the solicitation probably in late November, early December again, for those of you who have neighbors or those of you who maybe want to expand your program. And the difference on the back end is that you're a subrecipient. So the agency that was awarded administration of that subgrant and also TTA is Justice and Security Strategies, who presented yesterday. They're a partner with CNA on this general BWC PIP program that you're all grantees of. And they've been working on this since 2015. So they're well-versed and they've got a great handle on where those agencies are. And we've marketed pretty strongly. So we received about 1,000 applications and we awarded around 400 through that initial award and then a supplement award. And then we expect to be recompeting that again, like I said, in November or December. I posted the link. There's lots of information there. And even if you're a current grantee, if you're small, rural, or tribal, you may go to that website and find resources that are of interest to you. There are webinars on that are of interest to small, rural, and tribal agencies. And we do work, there's a lot of crossover between this BWC PIP program, which is a direct award for most of you. Some of you may be sub-awardees on partnerships under another agency or at your state administrating agency. We have a lot of opportunities among staff and contractors who work on both projects. It's just sort of an offshoot of the BWC PIP program, really designed to meet the needs and the capacities of small, rural, and tribal agencies.
Thank you. And I'll just remind everyone, if you do have questions, to please put those in the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand, we can unmute you to ask your question. The next question we have is storage an allowable cost?
Yes, it absolutely is an allowable cost starting in 2021, this grant year. Really, there had been some appropriations language imposed limits on storage that varied across the duration of this project. Initially, it was basically allowed on the match side, but not on the federal side. We always had an exception for what was called software as a service or video as a service, but now that's all sort of a moot point discussion, because beginning in 2021, the appropriators did not put any limitations on storage. We think that they put the limitations on because storage is seen as a sort of a continuation cost, and the idea of this program was to spur innovation and adoption of body-worn cameras, not really fund agencies in perpetuity in continuing the body-worn camera programs. I think we were successful in sort of re-educating whoever it is that makes those decisions that storage is really the cost driver of body-worn camera programs. The cameras themselves are relatively cheap, but the way that the vendors are monetizing this or subscription service more often now, video as a service where you're really, in essence, leasing the cameras, getting a certain amount of storage or unlimited storage for a cost per month, per officer, per camera. That seems to be the way that the pricing structure is going. It really hopefully makes this grant more appealing now that we're paying for storage. I would say that it definitely does. In previous years, we had some agencies drop out because of the cost of storage was just so prohibitive.
I just want to also piggyback on what John just stated about storage being allowable as of 2021. Just to clarify, that is applicable to fiscal year 2021 award recipient. If you have a grant that's still open that was issued in 2019 or 2021, just be sure that you understand that new rule is not applicable to you and your grant.
2019 or 2020?
Right, 2019 or 2020. It's only for award recipients awards that were issued in 2021 fiscal year.
And then it gets a little more complicated. In 2019, you could use matching funds for storage. In 2020, that our Office of General Counsel said that if you couldn't use it for matching, you couldn't use it for federal, but you couldn't use it for matching, but that's been resolved now. So it gets a little complicated. I think there may be some 2020 or 2019 grantees here, but for most of you this is the 2021 grantee meeting. Most of you should be good. And there's always been an exception if you were getting it as a software as a service or video as a service, and it wasn't itemized as a separate cost storage, basically where you're paying, $50 or whatever, $150 a month per camera per officer, probably a little bit high figure. But, if the storage wasn't itemized out and you were paying it in the package, that has always been allowable on both the federal and match side.
Thank you. Another question that's related to equipment and equipment upgrades. And I know this is one that we also get a lot of during our site team meetings. Would expanding our body-worn camera program to include in-car cameras that will all report to the same reporting system fall into this category? Are agencies looking to add additional BWCs and start implementing in-cars to be used in tandem as a comprehensive recording program? So would that fall under related equipment and equipment upgrades?
Yes, it definitely would. I think if it's reasonably related to the body-worn camera program. Again, we talked yesterday about digital evidence integration, and a lot of the vendors are going that route, and sort of smart technology where the body-worn cameras and the in-car cameras are synced to some extent and they work interactively. We certainly want you to take advantage of that technology. However, for the body-worn camera cap, it's related to body-worn cameras. So if you were to propose, let's say next year, to expand your program with 50 new body-worn cameras and 50 in-dash cameras, this is by appropriations language to support the purchase and lease of body-worn cameras. So your cap is determined by those 50 body-worn cameras. So that would be a $100,000 cap as opposed to $200,000 cap if you added the body-worn cameras and the in-dash cameras together, because the appropriations language does not call for support of in-dash cameras. There may be other grant programs that you can look on our website that support body-worn cameras or in-dash cameras, a variety of other different types of cameras or camera-related programs under our JAG-BURN funding or some of our other purpose area fundings. You should just continually check our website. I sent you the links to the OJP funding page. You can go there and get updates. You can check JustGrants.gov. You can look at the BJA funding page, the OJP funding page. NIJ does not generally fund equipment. They fund research, the National Institute of Justice. For those of you who are grant savvy, this is probably old news. For those of you that are new, those are sources you should check, because if you have a need, there's often some type of a program at BJA or OJP or maybe even outside of DOJ that would fund your needs. One other area, since I don't see questions coming in, violence reduction. We expect to be supporting a lot of violence reduction programs, including probably a micro grant or general solicitation on rural violent reduction programs, in tune with our website on that if you're an agency that's interested in that.
Thanks. So I do have another question in the chat from an agency in North Carolina. We purchased our camera from a cooperative agreement through the North Carolina Sheriff's Association. Due to our council's directive, we purchased those prior to being awarded the grant. A few questions. Question 1, we're looking to purchase a few more cameras. Would it be possible to use what we recently purchased right before we received the award as part of the match?
Okay, anything that is incurred before the award start date is not allowable. You can match for newer equipment, not the prior equipment, because that was prior to the award date. So anything incurred, obligated before the grant period is not allowed.
And since matching funds are held to the same standard as federal funds, that would mean that you cannot use your matching dollars on anything that's not allowed with the federal funds. So those units that were purchased prior will be considered pre-agreement costs, which are not allowed.
And North Carolina, that's my grantee. Please call me either later this afternoon or tomorrow, and maybe we can talk about ideas of what you need to do with your remaining grant funds there.
It sounds like they indicated that they are a subrecipient. Were they a subrecipient of the National Sheriff's Association, I believe?
I believe they just purchased their grants that way. And this is, if a person could, if you want to provide a little bit more information, I do not believe you're a subrecipient, but Lori, yep, not a subrecipient. So Lori says they're not a subrecipient. We just purchased our cameras from a cooperative agreement through the North Carolina Sheriff's Association.
I think they were piggybacking on an agreement that the Sheriff's Association had for cameras, which sounds like it's most likely cost effective, pulling together sheriff's offices. Yeah, just along the lines of what Gerardo was saying, we can't tell you, hey, here are some other things you should match on, but just remember that we just can't coach you. But, you should consider that there may be in-kind match or things you can match on besides those pre-award costs, the cost of personnel, other things, training, as long as they're, as Michael Williams pointed out, as long as they're related and instrumental in the body-worn camera program. You couldn't say you want to match funds to buy 3 new police vehicles, because that really doesn't have anything to do with body-worn cameras. But if you could think of programmatic expenses related to the body-worn cameras that you would expend as match in the award period, we can work with you to modify your budget.
The second part of the question is, can you explain the sole source process, since it would be much more cost feasible to add the new cameras to our existing platform. We're currently using WatchGuard. As a side note, the BWCs are compatible with our in-car cameras.
You already want to handle that? I think we handled something similar to this recently with a grantee.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
I think rephrase and start the answer, then you can back me up because this is more your area. It's an agency that already has either cameras or in-dash cameras, and they're looking for the same vendor. I think very much along the lines of what Michael pointed out, to make the case that that's cost effective. And what we know, we worked with another probably 3 or 4 months ago with an agency that, was basically coming in with the same issue, and they had to, explain in clear terms that it was cost effective to stay with the same vendor, because as we know, you switch vendors sometimes, and I'm not casting aspersions on any particular vendor, but sometimes the vendors will charge you a premium to convert that digital data into a format that's compatible with whoever your new vendor is. If you could make that case, just do so clearly.
By requesting a sole source GAM.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think, Michael, at some instances, that may just be that you're better off to call that a continuation of an existing contract rather than a new contract, because I think the new contract opens up the whole avenue of competition, which you can justify. I think it's sole source, but if you do it as a continuing contract, as an amendment to your existing contract, I think that gives you a little clearer line path.
Thank you. Another question that has just been sent to me in the chat. So this is from a small agency. They say, are cameras purchased prior to policy approval and allowable cost? We purchased cameras on Amazon prior to having a policy in place and approved.
Technically, you're not supposed to buy anything until all your award condition modifications, all your special conditions are met. This would be a case-by-case basis. You would have to contact your grant manager to let us know with a justification why you bought the equipment before the special condition was released.
Reinforcing what Yarrow said and just clarifying, it would have had to have been after the onset of the grant. It couldn't have been before the onset of the grant. We'll work on an individual basis with agencies. I think that raises another issue. I know, and again, I don't want to cast aspersions on vendors. I think sometimes, they're there to make money, and sometimes they'll tell you, well, this is a deal, and unless you sign by such and such a date, we're going to rescind this deal, or, we can't guarantee that this deal will be in effect October 1st, or let's say August 1st. We understand those pressures, but really, I think if you're under the gun, keep in mind that you should work with the TTA provider to expedite the policy approval process. We're not going to short shrift that because the vendor's putting pressure on you. I think we're all flexible, and we understand, and we'll do our best to get that condition cleared as quickly and expeditiously as possible.
And again, for all the grantees, they can contact either myself, Tamara, or Flora with specific questions like that, and we'll be able to respond to you.
Thank you. My chat thing went away for a second, so give me 1 minute to bring it back to see if we have any more questions. So far, I don't see any further questions in the chat. If anybody does have questions, please place them in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, we can take you off mute.
I prompted somebody I know who was in the audience to ask a question. She knows who she is, so won't call her out. But a former colleague.
We'll give her a minute. And actually, one of the questions that came up yesterday that I wanted to pose to all of you again that we may want to answer it is the one about if someone's a current grantee, can they still apply for grants next year?
Yes, they can. I mean, we, particularly if you're expanding your program, we welcome those. We do allow agencies to apply if they've reached the end of the life cycle of their body-worn camera equipment. I don't think that would apply to many of you in 2021 since you're less than a year into it. But keep in mind, if you do apply, we do give preference to new programs or expansion programs because the motivation for this program is to get body-worn cameras out there and to have more agencies adopt body-worn cameras. You can, but you should make sure that your application, you cover all the things you would cover as if you're starting a new program. The grant, it's a competitive grant process. The peer reviewers won't say, well, they must be already doing this since they have body-worn cameras. You should tell us how you're reaching out to the community, how you'll make sure your policy is deliberate, how you're going to take advantage of digital evidence, how you work with the prosecutor and other criminal justice partners in making sure you collaborate with them, because we know that the body-worn camera is going to impact pretty much every facet of your operation, but as well the prosecutor's operations, court's operations, and your community. So just because you have a program, it doesn't absolve you of the need to, if you were to apply again next year, describe how your program's holistic and not just an equipment purchase program.
Thank you. I'm just waiting to see if there's any other questions in the chat. Anybody raises their hand? Give you a couple seconds. I don't see any other questions in the chat today, and I don't see any hands raised. So if there's any other important points, either John, you'd like to make, Gerardo, or tomorrow, please do. And then I think we can probably close out, John, if that's okay with you, or we can wait a couple more minutes. It's up to you guys.
I think that's fine. I think, if you have questions that come up, you have our contact information. So email us. Again, we're really here to help. And I think tomorrow, Gerardo, I think, showed with their responses, we're really here to work with you. We recognize that some of you are smaller agencies, not as grant savvy as the Chicago or LAPD. So we know that for some of you, it's a learning curve, and we want to work with you to the extent that our rules and regulations allow. So thanks for showing up. I hope you learned something. We'll see you at noon Eastern time. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.